The crisp autumn air bit at Sarah Miller's cheeks as she pulled her beat-up Volvo into the long, overgrown driveway. The house loomed before her, a relic of a bygone era. 3 stories of weathered grey shingles, a steeply pitched roof, and darkened windows stared back at her like vacant eyes. This was her grandmother Margaret's house, now hers. It had been years since Sarah had last visited, but the memory of its imposing presence still lingered. After a messy and painful breakup that left her feeling adrift, the inheritance felt like a lifeline, a chance for a fresh start. The small town of Dunwich, Massachusetts, nestled in the quiet countryside, seemed a world away from the bustling city life she was leaving behind. A place to heal, to rebuild. She stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under her worn boots. A shiver ran down her spine, not entirely from the cold. There was something about the house, an air of quiet solitude that both attracted and unsettled her. Taking a deep breath, Sarah grasped the heavy iron knocker, its cold metal a stark contrast to her trembling hand, and rapped sharply against the aged oak door. The sound echoed through the silent house, a lonely prelude to her new life. The house exhaled a musty breath as Sarah pushed the door open, the scent of dust and aged wood filling her nostrils. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grime-coated windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the cluttered interior. Furniture draped in white sheets stood like ghostly figures, silent witnesses to years of undisturbed stillness. Sarah moved cautiously through the entrance hall, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. A faint creak from the floorboards above made her jump. "Hello?" she called out, her voice a fragile whisper in the vast emptiness. Only silence answered. As she began to unpack, a subtle unease settled over her. It wasn't anything concrete, just a feeling of being watched, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. While sorting through boxes in the living room, a book fell from a high shelf, landing with a soft thud. Sarah frowned. She hadn't even touched the shelf. Later that evening, as she lay in bed, a faint whisper seemed to emanate from the walls. She strained to listen, but could only discern indistinct murmurs, like hushed conversations just beyond her hearing. She dismissed it as the old house settling, but a chill ran down her spine. The following day, while exploring the attic, she found an old, tarnished silver locket tucked away in a dusty trunk. As she picked it up, a cold gust of air swept through the attic, extinguishing the small lamp she had brought with her. Sarah gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. She fumbled for her lighter, her hands shaking. When the flame flickered to life, the attic was still and silent, the only sound her own ragged breathing. But the feeling of being watched intensified, and a nagging thought, unbidden and unwelcome, crept into her mind. You don't belong here. The unsettling incidents continued, each one chipping away at Sarah's sense of normalcy. The whispers in the walls grew more persistent, sometimes sounding like her own name being called in a hushed tone. She started having trouble sleeping, plagued by nightmares filled with shadowy figures and disembodied voices. The thought that she didn't belong in the house became a constant, nagging presence in her mind, a seed of doubt planted deep within her. Driven by a growing unease, Sarah decided to delve into the history of the house. A trip to the local library revealed old newspaper articles detailing strange occurrences in the area, including whispers of unexplained deaths and disappearances connected to the property. One article, dated back to the early 1900s, spoke of a family who had lived in the house and suffered a series of tragic events, culminating in the apparent suicide of the patriarch. The article mentioned rumors of the house being cursed, a notion Sarah quickly dismissed as superstition. However, a discovery in the attic further fueled her anxiety. Tucked away in the same trunk where she found the locket, she unearthed a worn, leather-bound journal. It was her grandmother Margaret's. Flipping through the brittle pages, Sarah found entries detailing Margaret's own experiences in the house. One entry, written in a shaky hand, spoke of a dark presence that fed on negative emotions, a force that whispered doubts and fears into the minds of those who resided within. Its walls. The last entry was abruptly cut short, ending mid-sentence. "It's getting stronger, I can hear it. It's saying—" The rest of the page was torn out. A cold dread settled over Sarah. The whispers weren't just the house settling, they were something far more sinister. The journal entries confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The house wasn't just old, it was haunted, or perhaps something worse. The whispers intensified, no longer just indistinct murmurs, but clear, insidious voices that preyed on her deepest insecurities. They echoed the cruel words her ex-boyfriend had used, reminding her of her perceived failures and shortcomings. "You're worthless. No one will ever love you. You're better off alone." The voices whispered, their tone laced with venomous familiarity. Sleep became a distant memory. Sarah spent her nights tossing and turning, the whispers keeping her in, a constant state of anxiety. During the day, she found herself jumping at every creak and shadow, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. She tried calling her best friend, Emily, but couldn't bring herself to explain what was happening. How could she tell someone that the walls were talking to her, whispering her deepest fears? They would think she was crazy. The isolation deepened, amplifying the house's influence. One afternoon, while cleaning the living room, Sarah stumbled upon an old photograph tucked between the cushions of a dusty armchair. It was a picture of her grandmother, younger and happier than Sarah remembered, standing beside a man she didn't recognize. A wave of sadness washed over her. She missed her grandmother, missed the comforting presence she had once provided. As she held the photograph, a vivid flashback surged through her mind. A heated argument with her ex, his face contorted with rage, his words cutting like knives. The memory was so intense, so real, that Sarah gasped, dropping the photograph. The house seemed to amplify not only the whispers, but also the weight of her past traumas, forcing her to relive them with agonizing clarity. The whispers returned, now laced with the echoes of her ex's voice. "It's all your fault. You drove me to it." The line between reality and nightmare began to blur for Sarah. The whispers were no longer confined to the night. They followed her. Throughout the day, a constant chorus of negativity and self-doubt. Shadows flickered at the periphery of her vision, and she often caught glimpses of dark figures moving just beyond her line of sight. She started locking all the doors and windows, even during the day, convinced that someone or something was watching her. The house had become a prison, and she was its captive. One evening, while making a meager dinner, Sarah heard a distinct knock at the front door. Her heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't seen another soul since moving in. Peeking through the peephole, she saw nothing. She cautiously opened the door, but the porch was empty. A cold gust of wind swept through the open doorway, carrying with it a faint whisper, "You can't escape." Sarah slammed the door shut, her hands trembling. The incidents escalated. One night, she awoke to find her bedroom door slowly creaking. Open, she sat bolt upright, her breath catching in her throat. A dark shape stood in the doorway, its form indistinct in the dim light filtering in from the hallway. Sarah screamed, scrambling back against the headboard. As she fumbled for the lamp switch, the shape vanished. When the light finally flickered, the doorway was empty, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, intensified tenfold. Sarah began to suspect everyone. She imagined neighbors peering through the windows, their faces contorted with malice. She even started to distrust her own reflection, seeing fleeting glimpses of a distorted, malevolent face staring back at her from the mirror. The house was feeding on her fear, twisting her perceptions, driving her to the brink of madness. Paranoia had taken root, and it was blossoming into full-blown terror. She felt trapped, isolated, and utterly alone, convinced that something malevolent was closing in and there was nowhere left to run. The whispers now coalesced into a chilling, unified message: "You're next." Driven to the edge of desperation, Sarah decided she couldn't endure the torment any longer. She had to confront whatever was haunting the house. Armed with a flashlight and a trembling resolve, she ventured into the attic, the source of so many unsettling discoveries. The air was thick with dust and a chilling stillness. As she scanned the room, her flashlight beam landed on a section of the wall where the plaster seemed slightly different, newer. Running her hand along the surface, she felt a subtle indentation. Pushing against it, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a small, hidden room. Inside, the air was colder, heavier. The room was bare, except for a single dusty mirror hanging on the far wall. As Sarah stepped closer, she noticed something strange about the reflection. It wasn't just her own image staring back. Superimposed over her reflection were fleeting glimpses of other faces, distorted and anguished. Faces filled with fear, despair, and a deep, abiding sadness. Then, a figure began to coalesce in the mirror. A shadowy, indistinct form that seemed to be composed of darkness itself. It wasn't a distinct entity, but rather a shifting amalgamation of human shapes, a composite of countless tormented souls. A wave of understanding washed over Sarah. The dark presence wasn't a single entity, but an accumulation of the negative thoughts and emotions of everyone who had ever lived in the house. The house itself acted as a kind of psychic amplifier, absorbing and amplifying these negative energies, giving them form and voice. The whispers weren't external voices. They were echoes of the past, the residual pain and fear imprinted on the very walls. The shadowy figure in the mirror was the culmination of all that negativity, a visual representation of the house's tormented history. The shadowy figure in the mirror began to writhe, its form shifting and contorting, the faces within it contorted. In silent screams, Sarah felt a wave of terror wash over her, but beneath the fear, a strange sense of empathy began to emerge. These weren't malevolent spirits. They were trapped, just as she was, victims of the house's insidious influence. They were echoes of pain, not agents of evil. A realization struck her. The house fed on fear, on negativity. It amplified weakness and vulnerability. To break free, she had to confront her own demons, to refuse to succumb to the paranoia and self-doubt that the house so eagerly exploited. She had to find strength within herself, to reclaim her own narrative. Taking a deep breath, Sarah focused on her own reflection in the mirror, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. She thought of her grandmother, not the troubled woman from the journal, but the loving, supportive figure from her childhood memories. She thought of her own resilience, her ability to overcome past hardships. She refused to let the house define her, to let the echoes of the past dictate her present. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, her voice gaining strength. "This is my house now, and I won't let you control me." As she spoke, the shadowy figure in the mirror began to dissipate, the contorted faces fading away like smoke. The air in the hidden room felt lighter, less oppressive. The connection, the parasitic link between the house and its inhabitants, was weakening. Sarah had confronted the manifestation of the house's power, not with violence or fear, but with acceptance of her own vulnerabilities and a firm declaration of her own strength. The cycle was breaking. Sarah emerged from the hidden room, blinking in the dim light of the attic. The oppressive atmosphere that had permeated the house for weeks had lifted. A sense of calm, almost serenity, had settled over the place. The whispers were gone. The silence was no longer menacing but peaceful. She felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. She made her way downstairs, the house feeling different somehow, lighter, The shadows that had clung to the corners of the rooms had receded, and the air felt cleaner, fresher. She opened the front door, letting in the crisp morning air. The sun streamed into the house, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the golden rays. It was as if the house itself was breathing a sigh of relief. Sarah wandered through the rooms, touching the walls, the furniture, the objects that had once seemed so menacing. They were just objects, inanimate things. The true horror had resided, not within the house itself, but within the echoes of the past, amplified by the house's unique properties. She understood now that the house wasn't inherently evil. It was a reflection, a mirror of the human condition, capable of amplifying both the good and the bad. It had amplified the bad for so long, but now perhaps it could reflect something different. She went back to the living room and picked up the photograph of her grandmother. Looking at her smiling face, Sarah felt a wave of warmth spread through her. She finally understood what her grandmother's last, unfinished journal entry meant. The it wasn't a monster, but the weight of the past, the accumulation of negative emotions, and Sarah had finally silenced it. The following weeks were a period of quiet transformation. Sarah began to unpack her belongings properly, bringing her own personality into the house. She replaced the heavy, dust-laden curtains with lighter ones, allowing sunlight to flood the rooms. She cleaned and polished the furniture, revealing the beauty of the aged wood beneath the grime. She even started a small garden in the overgrown backyard, planting flowers and herbs, bringing life back to the neglected space. The house no longer felt like a prison, but a home. The silence was comforting, a welcome change from the constant whispers that had tormented her. She started inviting friends over, sharing meals and laughter within the walls that had once echoed with fear and despair. They commented on how much brighter and more welcoming the house felt, unaware of the darkness it had once held. Sarah never forgot what she had experienced, but she didn't dwell on it. She understood that the house was a part of her history now, a reminder of her own strength and resilience. It had been a place of terror, but it had also become a place of healing. She had faced her own demons, confronted the echoes of the past, and emerged stronger. The house, once a symbol of fear and isolation, now represented a new beginning, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of times. It was her home, and she was finally home.